Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null. Welcome back to the Gary Null Show. Let's continue right now getting into the topic of wake up and get healthy. Last week you saw us starting the journey. Well, this week and every week I do self-contained segments, so even if you didn't get last week's show, and some of you might not have watched it, you're still going to learn a whole lot in context today about what causes illness and how to reverse it naturally. That means that instead of spending $2 trillion, we could spend a couple $100 million. That's something to think about. That's doable. But standing between the integrity and the ethics of reversing disease are all the financial interest. Is anyone going to be honest about that? They can't afford to be honest. Once you accept money from someone, you are connected to what you gave away, integrity. And everything in life is an exchange. Everything is an exchange.
Drug companies tend to grant enormous campaign contributions to virtually all members of Congress, to various presidential candidates. It doesn't really matter what party gets into office, they've all been heavily subsidized by drug money. And that enables the drug companies to get their way in Congress.
Why always work on treatment? 99% of everything that's spent in America on medicine is on treatment, nothing on prevention. Why are we afraid to prevent something? For the reasons I mentioned. We don't want to interfere in some powerful groups making money and being angry at us and sicking their PR campaigns on us.
People believe that the FDA is there to protect them and that the claims being made for a drug are true. They don't bother to do the research themselves. In fact, the FDA is really there to protect the interests of the large drug companies.
One of the pieces that I wrote for the British Medical Journal recently was about drug company influence at the FDA. And we decided to make a cover story out of it. And so the front cover of the British Medical Journal had the question, who owns the FDA? The drug industry or the people?
FDA rated our clinic to seize single-dose, preservative-free, extremely pure B vitamin injections purchased in America but made in Germany, which they said were illegal. Now, when Commissioner Kessler got on television, he said that they rated us because of illegal drugs. But imagine the different reaction that people might have had if he'd said, we rated that clinic to seize their B-complex injectable, preservative-free.
We don't need to be paying taxes to have an agency that prevents us from saving our own lives, whether it be with a vitamin or a drug that's available overseas.
But what is it about hot dogs, hamburgers, French fries, pizzas that cause disease? Well, it's called inflammatory response. And behind everything that's going wrong in your body is inflammation. When you have a hamburger, the bun, the carbohydrate, when it's cooked, baked, it creates a chemical called acrylamides. When you have the meat that goes inside that, the meat when it's cooked, a byproduct is a cancer-causing agent called heterocyclic amines. When you preserve the meat to keep the meat red, then that's nitrites. And when you have all that together, you have nitrosamines and you have about 5 different cancer-causing agents. But they all, if they don't cause cancer, they sure can damage your cells. You have about 65 trillion plus cells in the body. Now imagine the magnificence of life. 65 trillion cells doing everything to help you every second of your life. You don't tell your eyes to blink every 10 to 15 seconds to create a tear duct so your eyes don't chafe. You don't tell your mouth to secrete 2.5 quarts of liquid saliva so that your food can be insalivated. You don't tell it to do that, but it does it. With all these wonderful things our body is doing for us, none of which was ever taught, how is it that we haven't paid attention to the idea that there's perfect harmony in our body? Perfect harmony. When we create something that creates disharmony in the body forgives us. It still fights on our behalf. If you get bacteria in your food or viruses because you're not washing your hands and you're touching everything and you touch your nose, you touch your eyes, you touch your mouth, and you put foreign agents in, the body will send almost 90 million antibodies per second into the fight. Why do you think you get diarrhea? You get diarrhea to throw toxins out of the body. How does the body know that it's toxic? How does it know that there's something bad in what you just ate? But it does, and it protects you. When you don't know that what you've eaten is bad, your body does. There's no chemist in the world that could determine that. It does, without doing an analysis. Think of what your body does all the time. So wouldn't it make sense, somewhere in medicine, somewhere in science, to honor life as it was meant to be, to honor this God-given creation, this magnificence that we call this life process? But what is this life process? It is energy. Moving my hands is mechanical. Electrical impulses is electrical. Biochemical energy, osmotic energy, thermal energy, to keep my body at 98.6 degrees no matter what the temperature inside or outside. All of this is working in spite of what's going on around me. Life energy. When you're dead, the only thing that's missing is your energy. Everything else is there. Your eyes, your blood vessels, everything's there. Energy's not. When you're sick, energy goes down.
In patients presenting in my office with a diagnosis of depression, in many cases, this is just a convenience of the treating physician who does not take the history completely to see that this is really a low energy state and not a true depression. And the therapy given is very commonly the antidepressant synthetic medications, but it's improper medicine in terms of it's not getting at the root of the real issue, which can be a very low energy, draining the body's mental energy.
When you're around angry people, negative people, you're drained of energy. When you're around happy people, positive energy. Why do you think we love puppies and kittens and flowers and moons and sunsets and rivers and streams and waves? We love nature because we can gain unconditional energy from nature. It is the revitalizer of life. Yet where do we go for our solace? Television. A pill. And how do I know that Americans need the last point I'm going to talk about? Because the number one industry in the United States is sublimation. Look at drinking, smoking, drugs, medications to alter mood, overeating, gambling, pornography. Put them all together, over $1 trillion. The number one industry is sublimation.
When people drink and do drugs and overeat, basically what they do is they're falling asleep. They're drugged. It doesn't matter what drug. When people watch television for hours, their brain is polluted. So then they're not capable to receive. The brain is a vehicle. It's an apparatus through which we receive information. But then that apparatus does not function properly. So people begin to fall asleep to what is true.
Now, if we were happy, we wouldn't need that, would we? I mean, if you're a happy person, you don't get up in the morning and say, I gotta eat so much food that I can't see my belly. It's just gonna bulge out and I'll only see the top but not the bottom. I don't even wanna see my feet. Men are not gonna say, I wanna treat myself so badly, I can never again have a libido. I didn't even wanna think about it. No, we don't do that. But we do that when we're not happy. If you're not happy, you can't be healthy. You can't sustain health without sustaining happiness. So just treating the symptom doesn't work. Look at all the people on diets. You think eating a lot of pork rinds is good for you? I mean, why don't you just go eat on a curb somewhere? You get more nutrients sucking that than you do on this steak. But everybody liked it. Why? Because there was no discomfort. You mean I can eat hamburgers? Yeah. Pork chops? Yeah. Veal? Yeah. Whoa. Butter? Absolutely. Can I bury myself in a cheesecake? Go ahead. Right? So people loved it. What's not to love, right? Except, of course, the kidneys, filtering all that ammonium and nitrogen, urea, and the toxins, the growth-stimulating hormones that are used in the beef and the cattle. and how toxic the animals are. And if you eat something that's toxic, you're just eating toxins. Forget the protein, fat, and carbohydrate. You are the total sum of the energy that you're consuming. And the point of an animal's death, it is in shock. It is such in shock that the cortisol levels go off the chart. And you get the highest amount of cortisol, a death hormone, each time you eat meat. And inside the flesh is blood. Now the blood doesn't drain out because when you're in shock, it constricts. And most of the blood's not in the veins or arteries, it's in the cells. And blood that doesn't have an immune system fighting to keep it clean becomes toxic.
We eat meat that is contaminated with pheromones of fear. We slaughter animals in a horrific way. So we ingest this food that is full of anger and anxiety.
So there is no such thing as a clean piece of meat, and yet we get used to it. And when you eat a hamburger, you could be eating meat from 1,000 different cows. It's all combined. When you drink milk, you could drink milk that's made from 1,000 different cows. And how many of those cows, because they're giving growth-stimulating hormone to get them to grow bigger teats to give more milk? Now that makes a lot of sense since we subsidize the dairy industry about $500 million a year for excess dairy that we store. So let's take an industry that already produces more than what we can consume and create a drug that makes the cows produce even more. And that's toxic. And that makes the cow get infections, can get infections, to which we give antibiotics. Well, when the cow has got an infection, you don't know it. And because white blood cells, which is pus, goes right through the milk. So when you're eating something that is dead and processed and putrefying and rotting, that's morbid and decaying, why would you eat it? If it's dead, you bury it. You don't eat it. But we get used to how things taste. Like alcohol, it's an acquired taste. John Wayne never walked in and says, "Give me a wheatgrass." No, he had to have the whiskey, right? And it had to be a hard whiskey. Couldn't be a wine. You never saw Jimmy Cagney, or Clark Gable drinking wine. It was bourbon. So when we drink today, we're drinking to alter our what? What are we drinking for? We're wanting to alter our perception, right? When we're overeating, when you go home at night, you don't go, "I'm so frustrated with my life and my work, and I'm going to eat a sprout salad." I don't think so. No, you want a whole bag of cookies, a pint of ice cream, and then call someone and complain. We're sublimating.
So the key for the human body, which is an exquisitely complicated piece of machinery, is you've got to put the right fuel in it in order for it to run efficiently. And most of us don't think that way, and most of us in America don't put the right fuel into our bodies, and eventually it's going to break down. What astonishes me is not that people get sick, but that people don't get sick more frequently and younger.
I recommend a very whole food diet to my patients.
Medicinal mushrooms like shiitake mushrooms and maitake mushrooms. There's such great information on boosting immune function.
I think it's wise to avoid highly processed food, and I think it's wise to avoid trans fats.
It's always important to keep in mind that the brain is the most metabolically active organ in the body. Although it weighs only 2.5 pounds, it uses 25% of the body's total energy. This means that it requires an enormous amount of vitamins and minerals and trace elements and essential fatty acids. If you don't feed the body right, if you're trying to raise a teenager on potato chips and soda pop, there's no way that the brain is going to get the nutrition it needs to function efficiently, and it's going to lead to a whole host of problems.
Children learn from their parents, and if they see that their parents are sitting around and they're lazy and just eating junk food, well, what do children do? They learn from their parents and they eat the junk food too. Also, parents aren't in the habit because it's too time-consuming, they feel, to make healthy food, when in actuality, it would take just as much time to go out to a fast food restaurant and purchase fast food and bring it home and have your family eat it as it does to cook a nice, healthy meal.
And I think it's important that families become much more aware of what they're putting in their bodies and reading labels.
So if you look at the reality, we keep taking pieces of this puzzle as if a piece of the puzzle is supposed to be our health. So if someone says it's all about being happy, okay, or being into meditation or yoga or exercise. All those are legitimate, but they're only legitimate when you put them all together. Why are we afraid of inclusiveness? Why are we afraid of complementing things and bringing them together as a whole? There was a time when we actually had comprehensive thinking. We actually had men and women who were Renaissance thinkers. They were not limited by artificial boundaries of fear. They were not afraid to express themselves. They were not afraid to include you, no matter what your background, into their thoughts and relate to you. Not today. Oh, today everything is very different. Are you rich? Are you poor? What school did you go to? Where do you live? Which neighborhood? What building in the neighborhood? Do you rent or do you lease? Do you own? Who are your parents? What's your race? What's your age? Too old, not old enough. Okay, but not the right religion. We so exclude people today that we have fractured the very thing that we need to be healthy and prevent and reverse these diseases. Inclusive wholeness. Wholeness is a model.
Out of that understanding that we're really all interconnected and that we're not really so separate as we seem, comes this illusion that, you know, you're a separate body sitting over there, somebody else is a separate body sitting over here, and I'm me over here. In that state, I think somebody else has something that they could give to me or take away from me, or they could harm me or they could be good to me. And in that illusion, then I suffer. I experience anxiety, I experience depression, I experience fear, I experience yearning.
Which gets me to the most important part of my lecture, and that is this. In order to sustain health, you must sustain happiness. You can do everything you want as far as vitamins or exercise, but unless you change what doesn't work in your belief system, then it will fail.
We can open up by letting go of negative beliefs. Those are our limitations. If we think we can't have something, we can't have it. If we think we're a loser, things are gonna happen that we don't like. If we think we can't succeed at a certain thing or in a certain career, then we won't succeed.
We can contract disease and we can contract health. That's just an issue of the way we see life. And why is that so important? It's a lot easier to change your mind than try to recover from a mastectomy because of a belief that that was the only way out.
You know, sort of like Gurdjieff, you know, the Russian philosopher Gurdjieff was once said, you can call on human beings to make noble sacrifices for almost any worthy cause. He says, but just don't ask them to give up their suffering. And he had the realization that we get attached to that. And I think until our health system becomes aware that we have to deal with that component, or none of the interventions are really going to work as well. Be able to work temporarily, but there'll be a recurrence, there'll be a revival of that symptom, or it won't even go away. Wounds won't even heal sometimes. Recoveries won't even occur because the person is attached to that suffering as serving some purpose.
The more we let go, release these negative and limiting beliefs, the more we open up to the abundance that is there for us, the success, and I mean in the highest possible sense, a spiritual sense.
And we've all seen that. We've seen a lot of people try awful hard, and for as hard as you try, why is there still a big void there? And the only way you can disguise that void is to keep chronically busy. Chronically busy, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, the to-do list. Don't embrace that fear, no, work around it, disguise it, hide it, put it in the closet. At the end of the day, you do not fail at life because you're too good at what you do. Everybody does something good. Everybody masters something. They master it so well because that's how you succeed. It's what you do not do well at, what you've hidden. The incompleteness of self is what causes us to make the wrong choices, and the wrong choices create imbalances, and the imbalance leads to dysfunction. The dysfunction leads to disharmony. Disharmony leads to disease. So if you want to help yourself with all these diseases, all these protocols work. They work, but they work when you include all of the pieces to the puzzle. Now let's go to the most important. Are you with me up to this point?
There was a 10-year study done in the Midwest, and they found that when you worked with alcoholics and you gave them the appropriate high doses of B3, B6, taurine, B12, you had a 10 times more success rate and not falling back to alcoholism. 10 times more success.
Laughter is so important in healing and health, and that goes back to Dr. Norman Cousins, who wrote a book called The Anatomy of an Illness as Told by the Patient, where he basically, among other things, used laughter to heal himself. And when you laugh, you really have good hormones being produced. And imagine how you feel when you laugh. I mean, you feel so good when you laugh.
There's an interesting study done on individuals in an intensive care unit. They didn't realize it, but half of them were being prayed for and half weren't. The half that had the prayers on them did better, and these were people with heart disease. So prayer, meditation, body-mind work is very, very important.
My hope is that the natural approach becomes the first and front line of treatment, and then you would use the drugs when they're necessary. That's what I call integrative medicine, and I really think that that is hopefully where we're heading, and I think that's what would work best.
Now we get to where it becomes fun, because just talking about diet's not the answer, or vitamins are not the answer. This is the part that counts. Why? Because when I traveled all over the world, to cultures to find out how come you're living longer than we are in America, it wasn't their diet. It was the sense of completeness of character. They understood who they were as human beings. They understood how to live in harmony, in joy, to find the simple pleasures of everyday life. Not long ago, I was in Portland and I was lecturing, and I'd done a PBS broadcast, and it was early in the morning, and I took a long run. I didn't know Portland, but I was just running up these streets, very nice streets there. And as I'm running, this guy comes out a door of a small house, and he comes up and he starts running, and we're running about the same pace, and he looks over and he says, "You Gary Null?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I just saw you last night." And we start chatting. And then I said, "You know about me, but I want to know about you." And he said, "Oh, mine's not a very interesting story." I said, "Everybody has an interesting story." I said, "Tell me about your story." And for the next hour of our run, he told me this, that in the 1980s, he was very successful in the technology business and startup company and IPO, and he made a lot of money. So he and his family changed their standard of living, as would be expected, and moved to a very expensive place, and he did the whole thing. He said, "I had everything, you know, the cars, the boat, everything." And all of our time was spent keeping busy, maintaining all this, but the most important time was spent maintaining our image. And our kids had every class imaginable, and everybody was on constant busy schedules. And then one day when the market turned and we went into that recession, stocks went down, value of my company went down, I held on, nobody wanted to give up anything, and at the end of the day I lost everything. But in the process I indebted myself because I borrowed from friends and family rather than just choosing to change. My ego was attached to everything I had owned. I had all these possessions, and I had no sense of who I was as a person. I was my possessions. So if you took away what I owned, you took away me. So at the end of the day, if you start throwing everything away, there's nothing left, then you say, well, where am I at? And then you realize that's who you are. You only were what you created. So he said, then I came up here, and the house that I am at is just a block away from where I grew up. And I remembered that there was a time when my father and I would sit on our back porch and in the summertime and just swing and talk, and it was so joyful, and it was the most peaceful time of my life. And he said, I so yearn to have those peaceful moments, to simplify my life. But everything I did was complicating my life. And now I was forced to simplify my life. And it strained my marriage, it strained everything. And he said, but once we realized that we weren't taking a step back because of what we had lost, but rather taking a step forward by what we were gaining, we simplified everything. We had to. And he said, now I sit with my family. We eat together. We do things together. No more 10 classes a week for my kids. We do things that are fun. We do hobbies together. And he said, what a joy it is to reclaim my family. He says, Gary, when you were talking last night and you said that you can't be healthy if you're not happy, man, did that hit me. My wife and I talked about that for hours afterwards because you're right on. But a lot of people don't know it because they're in denial. They're so afraid of losing something, their identity, to what they've achieved. we forget sometimes where the real lessons of life are.
As long as you believe you need something, you're going to strive for it, or you're going to be unhappy thinking you can't have it. When you let go of the negativity of that belief and you transcend that belief and ask the real questions, what do I really need, then you can find out what you really need and go after it and find it.
We're out of time again. Hope to see you next week as we continue on the Gary Null Show, providing you with the finest information on how to improve the quality of your life.